Hello and welcome to weeks 11 and 12 of Don't Give Up Your Day Job. I'm talking about the pilot map this week, which is the last stage of the process before writing the actual script for the pilot. Just before I talk about that though, in the last episode I talked about the treatment and how I was struggling to find the tone of the treatment, and I was explaining that this sort of marketing document that I'm writing to send out to people to advertise my series has to be written in the tone of the series. So if you were writing a comedy, obviously the tone would be funny, you would hope. It's a crime drama series, and it's a question of, is it a very sinister crime drama series? Is it got a slight comical edge to it? What is the tone that I'm looking for? So I spent a long time thinking about what the theme of my series was, and I wrote on my whiteboard in my office every single word I could think of which related to the theme of my drama series. And when I did that, my plan was going to be to then kind of orchestrate those words into the treatment. But in the end, I didn't do that. It just felt too contrived. What I ended up doing was just reading out loud all of the words on the whiteboard over and over and over again. And then I sat down and wrote the treatment. And I think it worked. I think the way that it came out, kind of a bit more naturally than the original way that I was going to do it, has worked. But it took me a long time. It took me a lot longer to write that treatment than I was anticipating. Consequently, the pilot map, which I was going to do 2 weeks ago, was only 48 beats long. And if you've never done a pilot map before, trust me, 48 beats for an hour episode is not enough. Yvonne has given me a ballpark figure of 2 beats or 2 scenes per page. So if this is a 60-minute drama, which it is, you would expect to have around 120 scenes which are written out in your pilot map. So your pilot map is this happens, this happens, this happens. It's basically a prose description of the scene. I know people have other ways of doing it. They use cards and so on. I literally just write a prose document and it says this happens, this happens, this happens. And I should have 120 of those, and I had 48, which is not enough. But I knew that, but I sent it off. We talked about it. I went back and I thought more deeply about 2 things. There were 2 things that I needed to decide before I could make it any longer. And what they were was, how long does the pilot span? What actual time frame is the pilot? Because if the pilot happens over a period of weeks and months, it's going to have a very different feel and a very different pace than if it was real time, and you've got everything in between. And so I decided that my pilot happens over 2 days. And once I'd made that decision, it was much easier for me to think about who would do what, when, where, and put more detail into it. The second thing I did, which Yvonne said I really needed to think about at that point, was the geography. Where is this set? Well, it's set in Bradford, it's set in West Yorkshire, but there are lots of different spaces and places which would be interesting, or where things would happen. Is it a domestic scene? Is it a scene that's happening at work? Is it a crime scene? Where is that crime scene, and what does it look like in this world? And that making those 2 decisions helped me enormously. So I've now got closer to 100 scenes, and this week I'm now going back on the basis of our most recent talk, and I'm getting into the nitty gritty of what has to happen in every single beat, in every single story. And inevitably I realised that some stories were not as fleshed out as others. Yvonne was missing certain characters who were mentioned but didn't really exist very much in the pilot. And then finally, what we talked about was bringing in some of what I've put in the treatment for episode 2 into episode 1. And apparently I've heard this before, that, you want to make your pilot, put all your best bits in the pilot, worry about how you're going to rewrite the treatment, having just worked on it and done it, worry about how you're going to rewrite the treatment and do those episodes later. The most important thing is to get all of the great stuff into that pilot. So I still haven't finished, but I'm up to about 110 scenes now, from 48, and it's much closer. And so I confidently expect that this time next week I will be scripting my pilot.